All right. First, our Finance Minister, Kenneth Oyata, has hinted that a planned high-level government delegation to China has been postponed to late March 2023. This is owing to the upcoming National People's Congress of China meeting scheduled for early March. However, the Finance Minister said bilateral talks will continue ahead of this important mission. The government is seeking under the G20 Common Framework for Debt Treatment to get debt forgiveness from some bilateral and multilateral partners. Key among them is China, whom Ghana owes to the tune of over $1.7 billion. Meantime, Ghana is likely to get an International Monetary Fund board agreement without necessarily getting a debt cancellation from China. That's a session by senior credit research analyst at Red Intelligence, Mark Bohlund. Speaking on PM Express, Mr. Bohlund said the completion of the domestic debt exchange program is a giant step for the government to secure a fund support program.
I think, essentially the IMF, I think in this case, can deem away that, even if the Chinese don't agree to this, they could do that. I think essentially, I think it's more likely that the Chinese will agree with a sort of debt reprofiling, just extending maturities of that rather than having a haircut on the debt. And that will be enough to seal the deal with the IMF.
Optimism is there that we may get a deal out of China. But that's the conversation is not only about China. We are attempting to restructure a whole host of external debt. And the commercial multilateral bit is also very important. I mean, and Mark, what's the mood among commercial creditors following, we've defaulted now since, I think, about December. Is there the appetite there among, commercial creditors to sit around the table and restructure our debt?
Yes, I mean, most people have been seeing this coming for a while, even though, it was only in March, April 2021 that Ghana could borrow $3 billion from the Eurobond market. But, it's been clear since, I would say, at least a year and a half among the kind of wider investment community where Ghana was heading. And the general view of the people I've talked to, my colleague I've talked to, is that the Ghana will be the easier of the current three cases in the common framework to solve, just because, mainly because the role of China is relatively small compared to Zambia, Ethiopia, and also Sri Lanka, which is not a sort of common framework case yet. So that's, they're looking, and general view is that the government wants to get this done as soon as possible, and that there'll be, in order to regain market access. And also it's worth keeping in mind that Ghana's debt servicing capacity is deemed by the IMF of being a medium, while Zambia is deemed as being weak. So it means that Ghana is deemed as being able to carry a higher load of debt. So my base case scenario has been for a while as a shallow debt restructuring, maybe I think the figure's about 30% haircut on the external commercial debt. It has been my base case scenario, and that they can reach this before the next election. You need to get it through Parliament, but I think that will eventually be able. But I think there is a risk that Ghana could become a serial debt restructuring case as Argentina.
Well, meantime, former Finance Minister Tegbe has said difficulties in negotiating a debt suspension program with China could have been avoided if government had paid attention to the sinking fund. Speaking on the Joy Business Thought Leadership Series, Mr. Tegbe appealed to government to pay attention to the sinking fund since it aided in paying for many oil and power deals with China in the past.
Remember, much of the big debt that we use for the energy, the pipeline for Echuabo and others were linked to an escrow account in which we paid in the revenues from oil exports, some of which were lifted by Chinese companies at Brent price for purposes of, and so those debts are amortized, and that is the idea behind the sinking fund, that if you are going to borrow, you must pay. And so you are seeing the idea behind the sinking fund. That is why the exposure is low. If you would look at countries that did interest only, the exposure to China and the rest is much higher, to that. I think we should be bear in mind the need for us to come to some agreement, in the context of these external debt exchange negotiations. Latest, maybe I would say it may not be feasible at the end of this month. It's impracticable, but if we can get it done at the end of March, at the latest, and then during the IMF World Bank spring meetings, get into the final negotiations, and nail the coffin on on the exchange with the staff level agreements, gaining acceptance, then I think we would be in a position within the first quarter, second quarter, beginning of second quarter, to have the IMF agreement going.
Right.
Let me sound another caution. We are not going to get...
Very briefly, we're a bit pressed for time. I'm sorry to push you, but we're a bit pressed for time. So very quickly on that point.
Just briefly. We are not going to get the entire 1 billion upfront, like the way we did the COVID loan. It's going to come in tranches, and it's going to come with reviews. And this is where it's important that our reviews is what will take us to the markets, back to the external markets. Our reviews is what will remove the overdependence on the domestic market. Coupons, if you look at Rich Fitch, we lost some, we missed some coupon payments in January and February. But I noticed that the T-bills were oversubscribed, and therefore, hopefully, some of that money could be used, to meet government's commitments, to the bondholders, and it would bring in inspire some confidence, in the system.
Well, still on Ghana's debt issues, Germany says it is prepared to help Ghana restructure its external debts only if some internal conditions are met. President Akufo-Addo a fortnight ago appealed to the German finance minister, Christian Lindner, to convince China to accept the country's proposal for debt forgiveness. Responding to questions on whether Germany will use its diplomatic relations to help Ghana, German ambassador to Ghana, Daniel Kroll, told host of Joy News' Foreign Affairs program, Blaise Sogab, that political commitment is needed to fulfill the conditions that will make the Paris Club forgive Ghana its external debts.
Giving your own challenges, unique challenges that you're facing as a result of the Russian-Ukraine war. The Nord Stream 2 obviously suffered an impact as a result of this conflict. So given this situation, do you share the same view that you're not in a position to help in the economic recovery of some African countries and allies of yours, such as Ghana?
You mentioned the visit of our Minister of Finance, who recently had talks in Ghana. And his message was clearly, yes, we are prepared to help.
Right.
But we are prepared to help only if certain conditions are met. First of all, we insist that those measures that can be taken here in this country have to be taken. The second condition is that, yes, we are willing to take our share of responsibility as one of the major bilateral donors to Ghana. But only if all the others also join in this effort. And there is a multilateral framework that was set up exactly for these kind of crises. And we urge and try to convince all stakeholders in this process to stick to this agreed framework. It's the G20 common framework.
But that framework, I'm afraid, Mr. Ambassador, is facing some setback, especially on the part of China. Our president was very categorical in that statement when he engaged the finance minister from your country. He's asking for the help of Germany to navigate that hurdle with China when it comes to the Paris Club. Practically, what's your country going to do in that regard to help?
Well, I think we all have to try to convince China also to take its share in this process. China is the largest bilateral donor to Ghana, so China has to be part of the solution. Now, Ghana has its means to convince China to do that. We, Germany, will also use our channels to convince that it is in our common interest that we all agree on a way forward, including in the interests of China. So this is the only way we can try to get China to the table. Your president is rightly referring to the case of Zambia, where it took very, very long until China in the end agreed to come to the table. We hope that this time, with a concerted effort, we might be capable of convincing China to shorten this process, because time is of the essence in the case of Ghana.
When you were speaking, you talked about some internal mechanisms that as a country we could deploy as our side of the bargain, just to complement your efforts from the international community. And looking back, looking at the country where we were rising economically and now there's a downturn, how do you feel we could be fulfilling our side of the bargain as part of the internal conditions you feel we could be meeting?
Let me point to three elements. Right. The biggest loss maker in Ghana is the energy sector. In this sector alone, each year 1.5 billion new debt is piled up. Wow. So if that is not solved, then you can ask the IMF for 10 billion. You still will not solve the problem in the medium term. So there has to be an answer in Ghana to the 50% technical and non-technical losses in the energy sector. If that is not resolved, I don't see how we can find a sustainable solution for the financial problems of the country. The second part is on the other side of the budget, and that is the revenues. Ghana has one of the lowest tax to GDP ratios, not even 13%. So we have been cooperating with the local authorities and setting up a very smart system of property tax collection. So I think that is an important way forward, and this has to be done, and processes and decision making has to be faster to meet the goals, to be able to meet the targets that have been agreed with the IMF. And the third point I want to raise is that I'm still amazed on the procedures for how the budget is set up, and how difficult it is to get an understanding of how this all works. And I think that is something that has to be approved. And again, we are offering support in this field. And I'm confident that if there is enough political will, very, very important decisions can be taken. And don't forget, I mean, crises are very hard for people. People are suffering, families are suffering. But don't forget that normally crises also offer opportunities. We from Europe know that the European integration process, we only advanced in times of crisis, because that's when people stop arguing about nitty-gritty, but really focus on the essential, and then agree on the important steps.
Well, it's not as though we're not trying as a continent. We're taking a giant step under the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, which you were talking about. But looking at how advanced the European Union is, there's the fear as to whether or not Africa would meet that test. So far, 8 countries, instead of the 54 that we're expecting, would jump onto the agreement and start trade as of last year. That did not happen. Do you feel that we're technically fit as a continent to run that program?
Of course, Africa can and must process in the way. I mean, let's take the example of interconnectivity. I mean, it is very difficult to understand why it takes you. Why do I have to fly to Europe to fly to Namibia, for example, from Ghana? You know, this. So there are many fields where the continent has a lot potential. I cannot understand. I understand why certain things do not progress, because there are people who have vested interest that there will be no change. But economically, I mean, of course, it's not very helpful and healthy for the countries and for the continent that so much time and energy is wasted at the borders. I mean, if you travel to the border between Ghana and Burkina Faso and you see the trucks sitting there for weeks, what economic reason is usefulness is in that?
Right, that full interview with the German ambassador to Ghana, Daniel Coe, is on Foreign Affairs. Be on the lookout for the airing times here on Joy News. Now, the Bank of Ghana has indicated that it will take the required measures to prevent any bank from going down as a result of shocks from the domestic debt exchange program. This follows recent industry data showing significant reduction in banks' profits and more than 5 billion cedi non-performing loans being written off as bad debt. Here's more in this report.
The Bank of Ghana in its report noted that, despite the challenges, it is hopeful that some of the measures that it is instituting will help stabilize the banking sector. The central bank also talks about its own stabilization fund that it is putting together to support the commercial banks in the country. The regulator was optimistic that this, together with other initiatives, will also ensure that the banks will be able to play their rightful role when it comes to the financial intermediation this year. The Bank of Ghana is also looking at other regulatory reliefs that will go a long way to improve liquidity for the banks. The regulator further argues these monetary measures, together with other actions, will also ensure that no bank goes under as a result of the shocks of the domestic debt exchange program.
All right, away from debt issues, former Chief Executive Officer of the Minerals Commission, Dr. Tony Obeng, has described any move to overly tax the extractive sector amid an economic crisis as a lazy man's approach. He was reacting to suggestions by the Institute of Economic Affairs for more taxes to be imposed on firms in the extractive sector. According to him, measures should be rather put in place to have these companies support various communities within which they operate. Here's more of Dr. Obeng's interaction with Joy Business's James Ishan.
Let's look at gold exports. I want to understand what, as a country, we can do to streamline our gold exports.
Well, I think already it is streamlined. I mean, it is just that we need to look at the lines and see whether the stream is really, that there are no leakages anywhere. So the exploiter produces the gold, it goes through some milling process, you just get the gold. And it is supposed that a metallurgist that belongs to government, I mean, the state metallurgist, so to speak, would be able to declare that the quantity that has been produced is exactly, normally the customs people, in most mining companies, there must be some metallurgist with the customs people who would affirm that this is really the amount that is produced. Do we have a mechanism of affirming that? We need to know whether we have a mechanism of affirming that. The current system is to assay. Now, I think there's a discussion between government and I believe the chamber.
Now we'll come to the Chinese bit, but let's look at revenue. According to the Institute of Economic Affairs, are saying the extractive industry in Ghana are not being taxed enough, but they should be taxed enough to, sort of help government rake in revenue domestically. You've been the Chief Executive Officer for Minerals Commission for some time now. What do you make of that particular report or assertion from the IEA?
I think it's a lazy man's approach to getting revenue for government. I mean, and already Ghana is not well centered when it comes to taxes from the extractive. Maybe we haven't spread our tax network wide enough. For example, the small-scale mining sector. Maybe government hasn't streamlined the process so well that even though we produce so much gold from the small-scale mining sector, for example, some time ago, about 35%, 40% of total amount of gold produced came from small-scale mining. yet the amount of tax that was received from that sector was negligible. If that is what he's talking about, if it's about the spread, then that's fine. But you just don't impose tax. You want to impose tax that will not overly hurt the sector. Having said that, still the mining sector constitutes one of the largest taxpayers in this country. In spite of the allegation that they are not being taxed enough, I think they still constitute one of the largest areas for revenue to government. And of course, once you introduce too many taxes, you tend to make explorers think too much. That okay, then let me look for another country to explore because the tax is reasonable there. So I don't think over taxation is the approach.
Talking about the Chinese and all that, and also linked to illegal mining, Galamsey, what is the best way to deal with Galamsey?
I think that you cannot completely eradicate illegal mining, but small-scale mining is very important to this country. Any government that stops small-scale mining does so at its peril. So that one is established. Now, how do we do it properly? We've seen, when there was a time when it was illegal, it was outlawed to do mining by Ghanaian, in that sense. But people were doing it in a surreptitious way. So it took until 1989 when the then PNDC government found out that we are using the military to chase them. Still they are going. You are using the police to chase them. You are doing scatter. Still they are going. So let's find a way of regularizing them. Do you know that Apetishi was illegal to brew? Apetishi. Yes. And at a point in time, government found out that, look, people are brewing, people are drinking. So let us regularize and control it. Now, how many people do Apetishi? They don't even know. It's mighty power and all those things which are there. It improved. So government at that time realized that let us regularize it. So they regularized it. The problem is, why haven't we seen some sanity in that area? One of it is what I've told you. The issue of people who are involved who are not supposed to be involved. And two, the investment in that area. Yes, money is required to start small-scale mining in the way it is being operated now.
Well, James Eshen's exclusive interview with Dr. Tony Obin, former Chief Executive of the Minerals Commission, airs next week on AM Business. Do make a date. Now, heavy-duty vehicle trading company Zonda Technology Ghana Limited is expanding opportunities for employment in the Ashanti region with the opening of a new branch at Sabin Akonfrom. Now, the move is expected to make the company's services available to key market players in the Obuasi municipality and its environs. There's more in the following report.
The newly commissioned Zonda Sabin Akrofom facility comprises of a service center and a truck assembly unit. Zonda Technology aims at expanding its reach to customers across the Ashanti region to repair and assemble trucks. Speaking at the inauguration of the new facility, the Chief Executive Officer, Madam Yang Yang, said the company aims to create job opportunities for Ghanaians aside from reaching the needs of their customers.
Growing population of our customer base in the Ashanti region has ignited more passion in our heart to open another branch in this region. Zonda Tech is not just in the industry to sell to our customers, but also to create employment for Ghanaians. In this branch, 90% of our staff are Ghanaians, because we feel that they will have a more understanding of our customers.
Branch manager Enoch Osaitutu says the company is willing to contribute positively to the automobile industry. He says the company will aid the community with their needs as part of their corporate social responsibilities.
I am an indigene of this land, so being here and doing this is a service I take personally. It is also to tell the Ashanti region and the environs our commitment to bringing that which we know to do best to the region. On behalf of management and staff of Zonatech Ghana Limited, I solemnly pledge to the people of Ashanti region and beyond that we will not fail you.
Francis Owusu Ansa, who represented the Ashanti Regional Minister, said the government is willing to push the private sector in promoting national development. He commended Zondatech for their services in the Ashanti region.
The government will continue to provide appropriate incentives and supporting interventions to attract both foreign and local investments, not only in the automobile assembling and manufacturing sector in Ghana, but other critical areas of our economy. And the government has pledged its commitment to protect every investor that will draw a pact with Ghana.
Representative of the Sabin Ekrofom Hini Nana Osei Kofi called on workers to exhibit professionalism in their line of duty.
I once again call on all workers here to work assiduously and diligently to uplift this company and ensure that this company reaches the goals that it has set for itself.
For Joy News, Nana Boachi Dankwa reporting.
And that's our bulletin this afternoon. Check out our website, myjoyonline.com/business for more news. myjoyonline.com/business. My name is Darryl Kwa. We will be back same time tomorrow. Goodbye.